Deviate Inventor. Debonair Freddie Roberts made a fortune from crime. The spry, 79-year-old Freddie Roberts sat happily at the wheel of his big Daimler sports car as it roared down a highway leading to England's south coast one afternoon in May 1958. Beside him sat his fiancée, a beautiful young model who obviously enjoyed her suitor's company despite the difference 51 years in their ages. Near Winchester, Roberts slackened speed a little, but only a little. Then it happened. A lorry shooting from a side road, screech of tyres, the fearful tearing, rending crash. Now Roberts lay dead in the wreckage, the unconscious form of his seriously injured fiancée a few feet away. Some kind words were said at Freddie Roberts' funeral service, although it was generally agreed it was high time England's king of the crooks moved on and made way for a younger man. The distinguished-looking Roberts, with his immaculate clothes, military moustache, and debonair manner, was for almost half a century one of the slickest rogues and most incorrigible crooks in Europe. He had been a safe-cracker, confidence trickster, jewel thief, and used to boast, "I've committed every crime in the calendar except blackmail and murder." During his long career he served a total of 10 years behind bars, but when he died he was living in a Park Lane mansion and owned 65 London buildings. The buildings were mostly in the Soho region and were occupied by prostitutes, so it could be said that the once proud king of the crooks ended up as a common brothel keeper. Albert Frederick Roberts was born in London in 1879. His criminal career officially began in 1900, when he got 9 months' jail for housebreaking. At that time, the slim and attractive Freddie, who was an enthusiastic amateur strongman and judo expert, had been touring the country with a music hall act. In this, he utilised highly developed neck muscles to allow himself to be neatly hanged on a set of gallows erected on the stage. After serving his prison term, Roberts abandoned crime temporarily to develop his obvious talents for invention, tool-making, engraving, and draftsmanship. He went to work as a mechanic in an engineering factory, was foreman in 3 months, and works manager in a year. During this time, Roberts collected £1,600, a reward from the government for inventing a device that fired a grenade from a rifle. Later the idea was pigeonholed somewhere in Whitehall. But Roberts had a criminal quirk which caused him to turn his inventing talents to nefarious use. In 1908, utilising the then newfangled oxyacetylene process, he produced a safe-cracking blowtorch and sold it to a London gang for £160. 3 days later it was used to slice open a Manchester stockbroker's safe. From their £8,000 haul, the thieves gave Roberts £800 bonus. After that, Roberts tried a little safe-cracking himself, but the enterprise was only moderately successful, so that in 1910 he was happy to sell one of his blowtorch outfits to an underworld character called Peter the Painter. Actually, Peter the Painter was the chief of a Russian anarchist gang which planned large-scale robberies in England as a means of financing the coming revolution in Russia. At that time the gang intended breaking through the wall of a house in Houndsditch, which would give them access to an adjoining jeweller's shop. It was believed the shop's safe contained £24,000 worth of valuables. Everything went according to plan, except that someone heard noises coming from the jeweller's and rang the police. At once the thieves opened up with firearms, dropping 5 officers to the roadway. 3 were to die. During the battle, the robbers somehow escaped, but were traced to a house in Sydney Street. Thus the stage was set for the siege of Sydney Street, in which 2 anarchists died after a gun battle with troops directed by Winston Churchill. Meanwhile, when safe-cracking equipment, including a blowtorch, was found in the house next door to the jeweller's, Roberts, fearing the torch would be traced to him, fled to Paris. During his stay in the city, he heard rumours that regularly, twice a week, a postman left a certain post office with a bag containing as much as £16,000 in registered mail. The opportunity was too good to miss. Roberts signed on 2 accomplices, waylaid the postman, knocked him unconscious, grabbed the mail bag and got away down a side alley. But when the bag was opened it contained only £26 in cash, they had attacked the wrong postman. He was more successful with a similar operation when he moved to Brussels in 1913. Using a motor car, he waylaid and kidnapped a stock exchange official carrying a bag of negotiable securities. The robber was able to dispose of these to a Paris fence for £12,000. After that haul, Freddie Roberts returned to England, where he laid plans to rob a Hatton Garden diamond merchant named Richard Harris. He took a smart flat in London's Portland Place and invited Harris to visit him there with some diamonds, which he told Harris he might buy. To build up Harris's confidence, Roberts first made several legitimate purchases from the diamond merchant. Then he offered to introduce him to a wealthy aunt who wished to buy a diamond necklace. Eventually, it was arranged that Harris should bring several necklaces to the flat, where Roberts' aunt would inspect them. When the merchant arrived with a briefcase containing about £32,000 worth of diamond necklaces, Roberts attacked him with a cosh, but Harris did not go down. Indeed, he retaliated with such vigour that he knocked Roberts out. Roberts opened his eyes 5 minutes later to find himself surrounded by policemen. The upshot was that he drew a sentence of 5 years for attempted robbery and violence. As it turned out, jail was better than the mud and blood of Flanders. The authorities kept him behind bars for the duration of World War I and released him not long after the conflict's end. In 1919, Roberts took off for New York, where, equipped with his special oxyacetylene gear, he became a valued member of a safe-cracking gang. It was not risky work, for the gang worked with a clique of crooked police officers who not only selected the jobs, but patrolled the area while the safe-crackers were at work. In 1924, Roberts returned to England with £40,000 in safe-cracking profits, which he invested in a West End private hotel and several nightclubs and restaurants. In his dining rooms he sold exotic meals to London's cafe society. But behind his office door he was a large-scale fence in stolen jewellery and masterminded robberies for less experienced members of the underworld. Then one night police raided his premises. In the office they found thousands of pounds worth of stolen jewellery. Freddie Roberts set off for another 3-year prison term. Immediately he was released, he tried a variation of the old duplicating hoax, using a supposedly intricate machine in a mysterious-looking metal box. Housed in a basement of Roberts' hotel, the box was used to swindle other crooks who carried large sums of cash. The box contained, among other phony devices, an oil heater, which was supposed to dry out the newly made banknotes. When demonstrating it to a prospective victim, Roberts borrowed a note, placed it in the machine, operated a switch, and after a few minutes produced the original and apparent duplicate from the box. In fact, what he had done was to release another note from a secret compartment. Then by sleight of hand he would hand back the original for inspection to the victim, so that he could satisfy himself that the forgery bore the same serial number. Having aroused the victim's greed, the next move was to obtain from the man a wad of notes for mass duplication. After binding the notes with wire, Roberts would place them in his metal box, light the oil heater and leave the operation in the hands of an accomplice while he left the room temporarily. When he returned, the box would be emitting smoke. He and the accomplice would feign horror and would frantically set to work pulling levers and turning knobs. After switching the machine off, Roberts would extract a bundle of paper completely charred and unrecognisable except for the distinguishing binding wire. This, the victim was told, was his money, destroyed through the mistake of the bungling assistant. The real money, on the other hand, remained safe in the secret compartment. With his money-making box, Freddie Roberts made several hauls of up to £16,000 from questionable characters who could hardly go to the police and reveal that they had been trying to duplicate banknotes. Then he made the mistake of trying to swindle an official of the Bank of England. His scheme was for the dupe to borrow £80,000 from the bank, have it duplicated in the box, and then quickly return it. Actually, Roberts intended fleeing the country with the money immediately he got his hands on it. What he did not know was that his victim, while pretending to join the scheme, was planning a trap with the police. As a result, detectives burst into Roberts' hotel and grabbed the swindler and his accomplice as they were counting the £80,000. Despite the magnitude of the attempted swindle, Roberts received only an 18-month sentence. On his release in 1937, he abandoned crime for good. Now he devoted his talents to real estate investments and ultimately built a property empire in Soho worth £200,000. His main tenants were 300 sex workers. Although a lifelong Casanova, Roberts never married, but he came close to marital bliss when at 79 he became engaged to a 28-year-old London photographic model. Before the wedding could take place, Roberts was killed in a road crash while taking his fiancée for a holiday weekend to the Isle of Wight. At a champagne party at his London hotel the previous night, the King of the Crooks had toasted his future wife in champagne and announced to his friends, "I want 3 children."